Okay, welcome. A little lunch and a show, as it turns out. We are here to talk about remote expert in the role of wearables, and as this conference is. My name is John Bishop. I am the president of Librestream. Librestream, we are a 16-year-old company, and really have been uniquely focused at the field worker, the remote worker, the deskless worker, the frontline worker, with technology solutions around remote expert, digital work instruction, and really in the broad umbrella of digital transformation. But being 16 years old, digital transformation was not a term we used 16 years ago. One of the things I'm very pleased to talk about today with the panelists that really bring their expertise forward is how this space has changed. And when we look at it from Librestream's perspective, 3, 4, 5 years ago, when someone looked at the role of AR or any kind of digital solution for transformation in the field, a lot of it was on cost recovery and how do we do cost avoidance, really. How do you not ship an extra person? How do you not ship an extra part that doesn't need to go somewhere? And we've seen a lot of transitions there where we're now doing optimization, safety plays a role, and knowledge transfer. And then more recently, while this is the 6th year at this conference on the wearable side, wearables have come in to play a very interesting role. So as I said, I'm very happy to have this very contemporary dynamic panel up here. And with that, maybe I'll turn it over and start with you, Mark. We're going to do a round robin session for the audience, by the way. We're going to ask a few questions, and we're going to have some time at the end for you to have questions. So jot them down. And we'll have a pass mic at the end. We'll keep about 5-7 minutes for that. And but feel free to chime in if you have questions out there. So Mark, maybe and the entire panelists, talk a little bit about introduce yourself and give us we talk about this world of AR and what it might mean. Talk about where you started your journey of augmented reality or remote instruction products.
Mark Norman. I just recently retired from National Oilwell Varco. I was there 22 years, and so I'm now on a consulting basis. Prior to leaving NOV, I was handed the pilot project or proof of concept that involved remote support and using video and any other means necessary to help the field service technician. NOV has people that they travel offshore to rigs, they travel to land rigs, and a lot of times they're going to troubleshoot problems that are not well identified. So they get there and maybe the original problem didn't end up being what they thought it was going to be. Maybe it's not in their wheelhouse. And the ability to connect to an expert and show that expert what the problem is and discuss resolutions was really critical for our customers, because a lot of times those problems would shut a rig down, and that can be very expensive. So my task was to introduce this to the aftermarket segment and get people to using it, and that was what we did. We wanted to make sure that when we introduced this, that we didn't have to pull it back because we did it wrong. So we were very controlled and slow in how we introduced it, and that's kind of what's going on.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Gary, myself, introduction. How did you start this journey down AR and digital transformation in the industrial space?
Well, Gary Binstock at Colgate-Palmolive. I'm Director of Innovation for the Supply Chain and Strategic Alliances. Since August, actually, I've been a full-time tech scout. I've been at a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. That's been interesting. So Colgate, initial foray into this was a large global company. We have factories in 50 odd countries and operations in 200 countries around the world, and trying to connect subject matter experts with the field, with OEMs, etc. So get everybody tied together to resolve manufacturing issues. That's our initial use case. And in the beginning, we started really small. We looked at a number of hardware devices and a number of connectivity platforms and did very small scale evaluation in the center control. And then we narrowed down to a couple of key ones and did a larger rollout in the factories at 5 factories, and then we narrowed down to one dominant hardware and one software platform, which Stage runs the company. You know, that's where we went. So now we're in a scale-up mode for that, and that's kind of been our journey. And I can talk a little about some of the do's and don'ts.
Yeah, that'd be great. Dan, how about the same question?
So Dan Jost, I head up digital innovation and emerging technologies at Molson Coors, a small craft brewer out of Denver, Colorado. So my team really has a mandate to try and best scale or fail new technologies ranging from AI, IoT to AR, VR, and blockchain. We got involved with this space really through 2 areas. One of our focuses on our team is to support a global innovation organization. So as we were thinking about some upcoming new go-to-market and training opportunities, especially in a space where a lot of these technicians will have never seen some of the innovations that we're going to be rolling out, we better train them. How can we help them understand how to service and provide maintenance to some of the dispense innovations that are part of that program. The second part of the use case really was in our breweries, and as I was spending more and more time with the brewery operators and realizing a lot of them were using things like broomsticks to check the distances between centerlining and changeovers, and a lot of other creative but somewhat arcane methods. It really came to us that we could not only facilitate training on changeovers differently, but also potentially reduce a lot of the costs associated with servicing very large brewing equipment that's produced overseas and requires sometimes technicians from overseas to fix those.
Great, thanks, Dan. And Jason, you're very comfortable with technology in general. Talk about a little bit about how your journey started.
My name is Jason Sagstetter. I am a professional problem solver, currently titled an IT project manager for H.B. Fuller. We are a manufacturer of adhesives, so one of the first things we set out to do was, we've got experts in their particular silos all over the world. How do we get them to be able to collaborate with the larger team as a whole? You can bring everybody together for a global summit, but then you've got all the timing and scheduling and T&E, and then those people aren't available for your customers. Because the second part of the equation was, how do we extend the coverage of that expertise and bring it to a larger customer base? So we looked at what tools and technology were out there, from wearables and cameras and everything under the sun, and it's about being able to apply the right level of technology to whatever the problem may be for that customer. And that's where our journey began.
And then Anasol, wrap us up on that discussion of the journey. From BT's perspective, give a little introduction to yourself, and how did things start in BT?
Hi everyone, my name is Anasol. I'm an AI and immersive technology specialist, research specialist at BT. British Telecom is the largest telecom company in the UK. We have presence in 160 countries, and we provide customers and enterprises with fixed line services, broadband and mobile telecommunications. I started my journey in this area with BT 4 years ago because we noticed one particular use case. BT has 50 years, is 53 years old. And we noticed that we had this aging workforce. And that combined with a mixture of legacy systems, new technology coming into the company with a lot of innovation, for example 5G and new equipment that is coming. Then we identified this use case for knowledge transfer, how we can provide or onboard new joiners, and how we can pass along the knowledge of the experts within the company in all these different issues.
Excellent. So I think it's very contemporary. You listen to the use cases, and I hear uptime, I hear just-in-time training, I hear knowledge transfer, I hear being able to support new innovation that people haven't seen, which kind of relates into knowledge transfer. One of the challenges that we hear a lot about is this space of digital transformation and applying remote expertise can be very, very broad. There can be lots of use cases. And so there's this, especially as technologists, and Gary, you may have the coolest title in the group, with Technology Scout, or Technologist Scout. That's great. Let's start with you, Gary. How at Colgate, how did you pick the one use case? I mean, when you look back at what made it successful, did you need to pick one? And how did you hone in on that one and avoid boiling the ocean?
Yeah, and I think in the beginning too, there's a lot of, hand-holding. We tried to essentially, in the very beginning, limit the use cases. Here are some suggested ways to use the devices and ways you can interact with the center, with your suppliers, etc. But what we found actually is once we started deploying it in the places where it started to take off, is they were finding their own use cases for it, whether it was one factory showing a best practice to another factory, or doing a central training in one location and then have other facilities and other subject matter experts chiming in. Even taking them out into the field for doing on-shelf quality audits and other things. So some of the use cases we hadn't, frankly, thought about, but it was great because then it was a pull of, no, we have some really cool things that we thought to use them for, and then we were able to spread those use cases around the world. But we tried, in the beginning it was really just the connectivity piece and using the tools available on the platform to connect people. But again, it's spread from there.
Sure. So Dan, on your side, you talked about you guys are using that transformative technology of the broomstick to measure center lines. And I know there's a splintering problem somewhat with those, but talk us through a little bit of that. You've got this one use case that you started out there. How do you control? You talked about maybe your one use case going into multiple use cases that you describe, and how do you support that from an IT and a corporate perspective to say, hey, use it everywhere, while also balancing you need to use it for your job and the adoption side of things?
Yeah. So having technology innovation and a team centered out of IT is interesting because on the one hand, you need to carve out the sort of creative freedom and the autonomy to explore and to try new use cases. On the other hand, since you are still part of IT, you always want to think about governance and scale and what does it look like when you hand off the baton. I've generally made the commitment to our director of security, our CISO, that I'm going to do a lot of crazy things, but I will always allow them to hack them and will always make sure that they're secure. So I think you always have to think about that. Having it based out of IT makes those conversations happen a lot earlier, and they usually are much more collaborative. So for us, as we are thinking about scaling this, and we're at somewhat of an early stage, certainly in both of the use cases I mentioned, as we think about scale, having your enterprise architect at the table at the beginning, having not only your business stakeholders, but your security team, having your IT business partner who's sort of owning the relationship with the business at the table at the beginning of the process ultimately helps facilitate that scale down the road. So if you're exploring use cases and you haven't engaged IT yet, bring them in early because that's going to make life a lot easier for you down the road, would be one of my recommendations.
Jason, what about you? What are your thoughts there on, you hear often this divide between the operational technology side of the business, the OT side, and the IT side, as you look to get out there and control use cases, but at the same time, get adoption and let people see the potential of it. What are your experiences on IT, OT? When do you bring the two sides together to have one conversation?
The sooner the better. It's been historical that usually it belonged to one team or one group was the champion. Wearables introduced not just applications to software, but now you're running on custom hardware. It may connect to a third-party platform. Oh, and it's a technology no one's used before. It's cutting edge. You've basically provided everything that terrifies your security experts, and your infrastructure doesn't even know if it'll be compatible. By having those dialogues much earlier, it will give everybody that kind of context so that it's not just a decision one group, whether it be innovation or IT, made by themselves. It was a discussion we had together, and we both discovered the things that worked well for us and the things that we were terrified of, so that at least we were aware of those risks, and we could either come up with a plan to mitigate them or accept that as part of the pilot. And then as the program would mature, we will achieve a solution together. So it creates that collaborative synergy without having to be forced. You don't have to worry about whose protocol do I have to follow, whose governance processes it belong in. We're all doing it together. So it creates that synergy. And that's important to have that relationship, because you're going to have challenges, things are going to fail, things are going to come up that are a surprise. And as long as it isn't unexpected and you've got those relationships to call upon, it makes those surprises much easier to handle.
Things are going to fail. I think it's good. That's sage advice. Things will break at some point at scale or otherwise. You know, Anna, when you look at kind of that notion of collaboration, and you talk about the relationship that Jason touched on there, another element we hear an awful lot is, let's agree how we keep score. What are the KPIs? So when you look at your organization and how BT defines success, and what these investments that you're making, how do you measure success? Is it helping the company? Is it not helping the company? How do you invest more? What things are important to track?
Well, it's very difficult to measure success. I guess it depends on the use cases. For us, is how we can improve customer satisfaction. So how we can, using this technology, allow our engineers and technicians to do things right the first time. That it improves in efficiency, in costs, in time, so that leads to customer satisfaction. But I suppose it's different in different use cases, in different scenarios, in different industries. Yeah, for us it's mainly how we can improve the service that we are providing to our customers.
Gary, I said you had the coolest title. I forgot Mark's title was retired. So he has the coolest title now. Yeah, no, you win. Mark, you know, you come from a oil and gas side of the business, and there's a lot of innovation in oil and gas, but sometimes when you look at the role of that field service technician out there, they may have been doing their job the same way for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. When you look at the role of how do you get out these new sets of technologies and really encourage adoption, something that works for you at NOV to say, you know, how do you use this? How do you institutionalize these technologies to have, you know, as you identify the KPIs and you agree that this is what we're going to do, but at the end of the day, adoption matters. What practices can you share?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you do is you look for people that are as excited about the technology and using it as you are. That wasn't widespread. And so adoption for something like that, especially in the oil field when people pride themselves on being able to solve the problems themselves and not have to rely on other people, is difficult. You sometimes have to force adoption. And when you were talking about KPIs, you know, our KPIs are basically, are we getting the customer satisfied as quickly as possible? Well, the normal use case for this remote support doesn't mean that it's going to get used, you know, every time somebody goes out there for a field service call. It's when they run into a problem they can't solve. So we don't really get a good metric on what if they fired it up from the beginning. And even though they thought they knew how to solve it, they collaborate. That would give a meaningful metric. But otherwise what you're doing is you're saying, okay, we have some unsolvable problems, and in using this, we were able to solve that. Now you can look at that. You can look at how many times you had to bring engineers from Norway or somewhere else out to a rig to solve a problem. But I think it would be more meaningful if you started using it as a routine. You built up a database of how it was used and what you learned from it. And then a guy goes out there and he fires it the first thing, and he searches that, and he can get a better idea of what he needs to do immediately instead of just waiting.
So yeah, I think that's good advice. The digital first. Start with the digital tool first, not as your last resort there. Dan, when you start looking at that, you know, Mark mentioned the notion of a champion. You know, a lot of this technology sometimes can seem, and you can go out there on the floor and you see a lot of things that if we show some of our neighbors or some of our family and friends, they might think it looks a lot like science fiction. There's a lot of very cool aspects of this. Where do you find that champion? You go pick the youngest person on the team and say, go do it, or What have you found works there?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, as Guy Kawasaki once wrote, sometimes you have to flow with the go. And what that means is you'll find your champions oftentimes in unlikely places. Everyone sort of has this preconception that it's going to be, you know, some 24-year-old just out of school, digital native, and they're going to be the ones who are the biggest proponents. And so certainly sometimes that's the case. But in my experience, oftentimes it's been really throughout the age spectrum and throughout the experience spectrum. So in the case of some of the work that we're doing with our brewery operators and with remote assist, it was actually someone on the opposite end of the age spectrum, someone who's had a lot of experience and was bringing in younger brewery operators because they, who often weren't very familiar with or had never even seen a HoloLens, or much less heard of the concept of remote assistance. So, you know, I generally try not to have blinders on and stereotype or profile one particular type of champion. But, you know, I always like to say that we play the police car when we have to and the race car when we can out of IT. You know, I think IT departments get a pretty bad rap, as Jason is nodding. He resembles that statement. And so what we try to do is, when we find that champion, really sort of partner with them and prove that we can be the race car to help them move faster in a secure way, maybe provide the sort of, you know, the guide frames or the guidelines that they can move quickly in a secure, fast, and well-governed way.
Gary, kind of come back to you on that. That's an interesting perspective, I think, when you look at that, Dan. You know, don't get caught in that, yeah, bring the 24, you know, something out of the closet and say, hey, look, here's a new toy there. Talk about the journey maybe on the Colgate side. You know, where did you form that champion? I know you served a lot of that role there, but talk about that champion and how did you develop that? And how did you institutionalize that as more of a digital first? It's the first where you go to.
Yeah, I mean, and for champions, it's both sides. It's on the rollout aspect, but it's also from the top down to find a champion at the higher level of the organization that'll be your champion in terms of funding, in terms of getting your publicity and resources. It's really important to get at least that kind of senior champion. And on the other side, I echo what Mark says, it comes from all different places. In general, in our factories, we have factory performance group. Those are generally the people we go to. But we found in particular in some of the early days, we like to do it in a more controlled environment. We can go to our pilot facility. We have a small-scale manufacturing operation for development work. These are pretty seasoned people, and they've been there for many years, and they're operating the same types of equipment for many years. And even if they're pretty elderly, they really get into the fact that you're involving them, and this is maybe the place where we try a couple of different platforms and a couple of different types of devices and get their feedback and say, is this helping with your job? What were the pros and cons and all that? Because they come in and punch in their clock and doing the same thing over and over again. They like it's changing their routine, supporting the organization, and looking at cool stuff, and that gets them excited. So it does come from everywhere.
Jason, that's interesting. You hear that notion, they kind of like the routine, but that doesn't mean they're reticent to look at new technology. You look at some of these technologies, it can provide a notion of oversight that sometimes gets captured in the lens of, I don't need Big Brother looking over my shoulder. And in the adhesive business, this is something that your company's been doing for an awful long time, and people they're very comfortable doing their jobs. How do you avoid that Big Brother syndrome of, I don't need help with my job, I know how to do my job?
That's a good question. There's a real simple answer. It's no. When you're applying a new tool in any process, you have to be sure that you're demonstrating what the value will be when it works. They have to see that before you even start the program. They understand what changes are you looking to make and understand the why. You can have passion about a technology or a tool, but if the person you're talking to doesn't have that understanding of how does that apply to me, what does that mean to what I have to do every day, that will change your adoption rate. Make them your best advocate. If someone is an opponent, find out what it is that they're concerned about. What are their biggest fears? What's their biggest concern? and show them how your improvement or your change will help make that piece simpler. Or if you can't impact whatever that one fear is, find out the other 6 or 7 it's going to make simpler. Try to make sure that the perception of that value is appropriate size. It kind of falls into the level of stakeholder management. You're not just managing up for your EC and the people that are sponsoring the program. You have to manage down just as much for the people who are on the front lines going to be using this tool every day, because they're the ones that are either going to make or break it. And if they want it to be a success because it's going to be a value to them, they'll get behind it. They'll work around whatever obstacles appear. They will become your advocate in the field. And once you get that momentum going, your project is already a success.
I think we're talking about jamming.
That's exactly right. And the other thing that we wanted to try to get across to a guy, somebody that was more seasoned out in the field, was that he may actually be mentoring a young engineer back that's on this remote support call. So maybe the engineer hasn't been out on a rig or hasn't been on that kind of rig, and he has a chance to see and actually look over the guy's shoulder and learn from that. So that it really does work both ways.
And so you mentioned knowledge transfer kind of being in your opening remarks there, and you talk about, springing off of Mark's comment about mentoring. This set of technology allows you to not only solve the problems and help the customer success, but talk about the role of capturing it for mentoring and knowledge transfer and next generation training and just-in-time training. How's BT look at that? How do you look at that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This technology allows you to do what, at least we think it allows you to do all this knowledge transfer. And just to add a bit of what it has been talked about, once you find this champion person, it helps you a lot, particularly in the operational side. You will always have technology resistance at any level. And we noticed that when we were doing some trials with one of these devices, we had all the youngers, like all the apprentices, they were very excited about the technology. We had elderly technicians. They were not very keen into trying this, but once they tried, not perhaps from the perspective of the first person wearer of the device, but from outside, to see the value that brings into the company, they were very keen into doing this. And we had that very specific use case in which one of our expert engineers, he was just coaching an apprentice using one of these headsets. And then they completed the procedure, they finished the task, and then this engineer noticed that there was some red light in one of the devices. And then he realized, well, this is not right. We did the procedure correctly, but why is this red light still on? And then, because he could have this first-person view perspective remotely, he noticed that there was something wrong, and then they completed the task, and then they looked at this problem, and then he saw this value into this kind of technology. And this is where you have all this knowledge transfer. It's just not doing like step-by-step instructions that are in the manual. Is when you notice all these day-to-day things that are not scheduled, that are just impromptu things that you need to solve.
Yeah, it's very true. These technologies, they live in the real world, and so unexpected things can happen. And we've talked a little bit about managing efficiency and uptime, and we've talked about knowledge transfer and a couple other use cases there. There is the element, there's a contemporary term now around digital distraction. Almost there is too much that can happen out there. And so you mentioned the notion of something new popped up, but we're also working in a real world environment. And you've got oil and gas and manufacturing and production, and there's the safety element, there's the human element. So how do you balance providing too much? Where's the line between digital being the priority versus digital being the assistant? How have you looked at that from your organizational perspective? Jason, let's start with you on that one.
At H.B. Fuller, nothing we do is worth getting hurt for. You will hear this message again and again from the CEO down. Safety is our #1 priority, plain and simple. So anytime we're going to change a process or introduce a new tool, the very first hurdle you got to go through is, what does this mean to employee safety? What does this mean to production safety? We had to look at just the technology. It had to be compatible with all of our PPE. These guys have to wear a hard hat. They have to have hot melt gloves on. They got to have a bib. They got to have over-ear audio protection. They're wearing all kinds of other equipment that anything I'm introducing cannot disrupt the existing protections that are already in place. So when you're looking at what do I want them to be focusing on, if you're putting on a heads-up display, first of all, it can't obscure their vision. They still got to be able to see. I also don't want the content to be so distracting they're looking at the display and walk into a pole or extend their hand into a piece of machinery. They need to be able to operate with their existing processes and enhance that functionality. If you're going to be able to replace a dangerous procedure with a new tool or technology, great, you're now simplifying the process. You may add complexity in the tools or the number of pieces of hardware to call upon, but that's just like having a larger set of screwdrivers. You have more choices to go into and grab the appropriate one for whatever task you're trying to do. Don't try to give them too many different custom tools to do a specific job. Just give them the right amount to select the appropriate tool for the task. And by doing that, you'll have a higher complexity on your IT side, your operational side, maybe on your supply chains, but you're simplifying the task that's the highest risk. You're simplifying that piece for the day-to-day operator. That's really where you get the most bang for the buck.
Mark, oil and gas is pretty variable conditions. There can be some pretty crazy situations as far as that level of machinery. You know, you get hurt real fast if you're not careful. How did you guys, where'd the voice of safety come into the process? Was it the IT side? Was it the OT side? How was that considered along the way for the process?
Well, we didn't, nothing was done unless it, just like Jason was saying, if it had any degradation to safety, it wasn't done. And so it had to be something that enhanced safety, didn't just keep things neutral. So one of the things that NLB does is a big believer in the HMD. So it's hands-free. Everything is hands-free because when you're walking around the rig, you need both your hands. You're going up and down stairwells, and so it's very important. Plus, you have the vision that you need. You're wearing safety glasses. That's not a hindrance, and so you need to be able to see everything. That's one thing. As far as how this enhances safety, well, if for instance, like work instruction. Now we had only gotten very, just touched the surface of using work instructions along with this. But what that allows is you don't really have to focus on how you're, on the process of remembering and writing stuff down and all that. It's there right in front of you, and you can focus on the task and then record that as it goes.
Anasol, back to you on, with BT, one of the DNAs of the company is connectivity. And like you mentioned, you've got a big landline business in connectivity. One of the things that I think all the panelists have described is the situation doesn't exist in a lab. It exists out in the real world, and it's fairly distributed. It can be very broad, and some of these locations, they can be very remote as well. Connectivity is not even an enabler, it's a requirement. How have you looked at connectivity? How have you managed that? Is there any advice that you could share on how you just approach connectivity and making sure that's there so these tools can be used effectively?
It's a very good question. Because we are dealing with real life problems, and it's not everything based on a lab. You have a lot of issues that you have to deal with. It's not just connectivity, it's also environmental variables like light. Our engineers are outside in the rain when it snows, when they are in very remote parts of the country where they have very low connectivity. So you need to be prepared for all these cases. And it can be relied on different technologies, but basically you need to consider all the use, all the scenarios possible. You have to have all this information available locally. In case you don't have enough connectivity, you have to foresee if there's going to be perhaps problems with the technology you are wearing in brain conditions. Also noise is something that has been reported as well. So because all this technology is evolving, perhaps it needs to be adapted to all these scenarios, but perhaps we are not still in the best place in terms of hardware. We are getting there. We need to still analyze or adapt all these technologies we have available in terms of all these scenarios that you need to deal with in real life.
I'll address that as well. Yeah, and that's the biggest, number one thing that frustrates people. If you have a very fuzzy image quality or sound or it gets dropped, that's very frustrating, so that's important. When we started this scale out, we were doing hotspots and things like that, and that's not sustainable too. In a lot of locations there is no cell service. And then we looked at connecting to an existing plant system like a WMS system, warehouse management system, and then there were concerns over from IT, from security, and also using too much bandwidth and all of that. What we ended up doing when we rolled out and started to scale is created our own IoT network. We call it a virtual IoT network that's segregated, and its main use case is for things like wearable and this type of technology. And then we have one standard. This is how you connect to the network. This is how you set up a device, etc. And that's worked out pretty well.
Just as a point of comfort, it doesn't get any easier when you're in IT trying to do the same thing. Certainly as a solution developer on my team can attest, a lot of the IoT work we do within our lab, because our network is identity managed, is banging our heads against the wall trying to get things to connect to networks that weren't meant for things to connect to. And so, just to echo your point, I think having that conversation early about setting up a parallel IoT-specific network, going through the proper channels, but then usually once that's set up, you're given pretty much free rein to go on. It's not an easy hurdle to overcome, but certainly something that...
A good part of it was too that once we had this network, now I'm doing a lot of pilots where we're sending sensor data to third parties to do analytics and all of that. Now we connect all the sensor gateways to that network and everything else out there. Now we don't have to go down the same discussion every time of you're going to use up bandwidth and it's not secure, so we're reaping the benefits in other ways now and other.
You say it future-proofs your use case a little bit? You've been given a little bit of headroom, it sounds like that.
Well, yeah, because I mean, the wearables bore the brunt of a lot of the issues that came up in terms of device management, in terms of connectivity to the internet, whether it should be on-prem or off-prem, or how you connect to the cloud, and how you're managing passwords and all of this kind of stuff. So since it was one of the early IoT use cases, that kind of bore the brunt of that, and also how we set up the connectivity. And now that's kind of, it's kind of future-proof us for some other technologies.
So Jason, to you, you get the magic wand here for a moment. You've got the magic wand, you've got the learnings of the past few years of everything that you've done with IoT, with AR, with industrial technology solutions around digital transformation. Pick the one or two things you would do different to get to where you are today.
We're at a technology conference talking about technical solutions, but the core of the matter is always it comes down to people. We're all human beings, and human nature does what it does. Change is the hardest thing for almost anyone to go through. So change management, not just from, hey, I'm following a governance process, but change management from talking to the person so that they know how their job may change, how this technology may impact them, what that may mean to our customer, what value that may deliver. Focusing on managing that change at multiple levels is critical to anyone's success. And if you don't provide a tool to make that process simpler, we talked about like the face-borne camera in the production environment having hands-free. If we don't give them a tool, they're going to still do it. They're still trying to capture it. If someone's going to pull out their phone and put it near equipment or get in harm's way, they're going to be worse if you don't do something. So try not to ignore what the needs of your employees are telling you, but try to find at least some kind of a middle ground for it. Otherwise, they're going to be inventive and probably cause more harm than good in their own solution. People will invent their own solution to the problem. It's just they want to get it solved, even if it's not following a process. So by trying to give them more tools to do it according to process, you'll be more successful with that.
Mark, anything? What lessons learned? What magic wand? Did you do it all perfect?
I think that, absolutely not. I think that if I was handed this again, knowing what I know now, what I would do is I would pick one offshore rig and one land rig, and we would partner with that customer to completely inundate their rig with that technology and make sure that every time somebody visited that rig, or even if they had a problem, that they were able to use the technology to contact us. And that would be much easier to demonstrate, you know, is this good going forward? Did it help us, or was it just a nice to have? That's exactly what I would do there, instead of just, you know, hit and miss in different places.
So we've hit 5 minutes left in this panel. If you've got any questions, raise your hand. We've got a mic runner. In the absence of questions, I can keep talking. Oh, we got one up front?
Yeah, we got one right here.
Sorry, we got one in the middle.
And I'll come to the person in the front.
Okay, my name's Laura Corkery. I'm with PepsiCo, specifically with Frito-Lay. I'm definitely interested in hearing, you know, between Colgate and Coors, what specific technology you guys were implementing and what the use case was.
Sure. So at Coors, Microsoft is one of our strategic technology partners in IT, whether it's everything from Active Directory to Azure to Office 365. So we had the opportunity to work with the HoloLens product team. So we were using HoloLens hardware, and we actually helped be one of the early advisors on a new guides application they've been developing and just recently announced. So we've been kind of in private mode, if you will, private preview mode for the last year or so, and are now able to speak a little bit more openly about some of that work. But that was the primary solution. What's exciting, so that was for the remote assist and especially the guided instructions for the floor operators. And on the dispense and innovation side, all that is built on the Azure IoT stack. So one of the things that we're looking to do is see convergence between all the IoT data using the Microsoft ML AI engine and the HoloLens to sort of converge that into a hands-free heads-up display.
We've also done some work with HoloLens for guided maintenance, but not rolling that out. It's in the POC stage, and it's super powerful with the floating sensor data and all kinds of cool stuff, but more of a POC. Predominantly, because of the factory setting and hands-free, we're using RealWear, HMTs, and the Librestream platform is our primary. Although we've tried others, we've used Vuzix as well, and some other platforms. But for the current rollout, we're standardizing.
So this is Kirk from Lockheed Martin. So the concept of sponsorship came up quite a bit in today's panel. And one of the issues that we're running at Lockheed Martin is the concept of sponsorship is very fluid. Either people move like musical chairs from one position to the next. So what I found is you really have only about 1 or 2 years that you can hold on to a sponsor. If you can't make something happen in those 2 years, either the project dies or you have to find a new sponsor. So do you have that same problem in your guys' company, or does it work a little different?
Mark, you'll lead us off?
Yeah, we didn't have a formal sponsor, except that the president of our group, Rig Technology, was solidly on board. So if you had any problem, if you had any pushback from someone, you just had to mention his name, say, this guy is all for it. And so that's sort of like having a sponsor that doesn't leave. I agree, you really need that, and if you have somebody that's going into different roles or something, you've got to make sure that there's a transition there and that everybody understands that just because it's a new person doesn't mean you start over, or that you can somehow not fulfill commitments you had before.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the best plan perhaps is to have a sponsor in the management level rather than the project, because then you will have support through different use cases. And because change happens so quickly, I mean, it's unexpected. And it's not just in sponsorship, it's also in technology. You need to adapt quickly to all the changes. So if you have a sponsor at management level, it will make things easier.
Thank you. So one last one, I've got 7 seconds, but I'm going to go over time. Lightning round. 0 is we've just started the journey. 100 is we're at the end, we can't see any more use cases, we've exhausted it completely. Just go through, give me a number. Start off, Jason, maybe with you, on where are we on this continuum of adoption of these technologies within your organization, 0 to 100?
A 5. We are just beginning to scratch the surface of what these technologies can do, and part of the challenge is there's so many possibilities holding people back to say, no, let's focus on these few right now that we know will deliver value, so you don't overwhelm yourself with too many possibilities.
2.5, because he's wearing Google Glass and I'm not.
Anna?
I would say we are just starting. So there are so much different use cases. We have just scratched the tip of the iceberg, and the technology is improving all the time. So once you have identified a use case, you identify technology, perhaps software, but then something new comes, and then you need to reassess all the solutions you have developed. So I think we are just starting.
I didn't hear a number. These are my big good numbers, but not quite a number.
Maybe 2.
2.5 stuff. By the way, thanks for that, Dan.
I think I would say about a 5. We were just talking earlier that people, younger generation, don't know what film is for a movie. Like, they don't understand the concept of non-digital. I think we're going to look back at this time in 20 years from now and be, laughing at maybe how archaic, some of this stuff is. I fully believe in 20 years you're going to have don your safety glasses, have a heads-up display, give you your work instructions, tell you what your next task is, and you're going to communicate natural language. It's going to be pretty seamless. There'll be some bumps along the way, but I'm certain that's happening. It's just going to take time and evolution.
Mark, bring us home.
You said 0 to 100, right?
Oh, you go on the negative scale. I guess you could do like absolute value, maybe?
I had a number in mind until I started hearing 5, 2.5, 2.
Influenced by the group?
I think, I think as far as NOV is concerned, they've identified some major use cases, and it's easier to roll out. The one thing that we did find also is that in demonstrating this to people that were excited about hearing about it within the organization, they came up with use cases we hadn't thought of or that we didn't feel like were important enough or high enough on the list, but it was important to them. So that, in a way that would set us back again, because it turned out to be a good idea. So I might have said 20 before. There's no way I'm saying 20 now.
You're getting shamed? You're getting shamed or not? All right, what's peer pressure put you at, Mark? You're sticking with 20? I'm putting you on record.
2.25.
2.25. Wow, it's like Price is Right up here. All right, well, thank you all for the tremendous feedback. I think one of the big takeaways, especially with that last question, is this is a very transformative space, a tremendous amount of use cases, a tremendous amount of considerations on the IT, OT, safety side, but we are still very nascent. We're at the tip of the iceberg, and I hate to use that analogy, but there's a lot ahead of us with this technology. It can be impactful. There's a lot of questions around it. A lot of contemporaries and peers up here, so thank you so much for sharing the information. And thank you all for attending. Enjoy the rest of the show.